Hello everyone, welcome. Today we're going to do a deep dive into a book that for many in the West was a gateway text into understanding China. That is Peter Hessler's book Oracle Bones, and I have my copy here stored in a box for the past 20 years because I first read this book 20 years ago when it was published in around 2006 in a very different world, pre-financial crisis and early on in the industrial and financial rise of China, an era of optimism about globalisation. Back then, I remember being enthusiastically interested in writings like Hessler's. He, like Paul Theroux in books like Riding the Iron Rooster, was one of the first foreign observers living in China, in places only recently opened up to them. Hessler's writing is decent, his stories are engaging, and he makes some insightful connections between China's ancient past and its rushing present. It felt like a masterpiece, but rereading it now with the benefit of hindsight and a much clearer understanding of Chinese history and how information operations work, the book feels completely different. First, a bit of context on Hessler himself. He first went to China in the late 90s as an English teacher with the Peace Cause in Fuling, Sichuan, and that experience became his first book, another bestseller, as is this one, called River Town. It's important to note that Peace Corps, while often seen as a charitable organisation, is an official agency of the United States government. And after this teaching stint, he becomes a freelance writer and eventually a foreign correspondent for The New Yorker in Beijing. Now, Oracle Bones, the book, is structured around his relationships with his former students in Fuling, the letters they write to him, the phone calls he has with them. Now, just why such relationships are fostered by Hessler, I do not know. Does seem a little odd to keep their deeply personal letters and make a book out of them. He follows them as they graduate and try to make their way in the new, rapidly changing China, working in factory towns and in booming cities. And this journeying throughout China in the early 2000s is interspersed with the aforementioned Oracle Bones as a foregrounding topic of the book, and visits he makes starry-eyed to academics and the Chinese archaeologists he pursues more ruthlessly. On the surface, this is a brilliant device, showing China and the changes through the eyes of its youth. But step back, this premise is completely inappropriate. Imagine a Chinese journalist who was formerly an agent of a Chinese government agency, teaching in, say, rural Texas, keeping meticulous files on his young, impressionable students, and then, years later, tracking them down to document their successes and failures for a major state-affiliated media outlet back at home. Need I say any more? We would immediately recognise that this is a profound ethical violation and a potential intelligence-gathering operation. The thread that Hessler uses to tie all these stories together is the Oracle Bones narrative, which were the inscriptions written on turtle shells, the ancient Shang dynasty relics used for divination that they found in Anyang in the early 1900s. In the course of the book, he pursues elderly scientists and confronts them about their past actions and research during times of political turmoil. And there's a persistent nagging tone here, a journalist acting as a judge of Chinese history, holding very old and often frail academics to account for decisions they made decades ago, under completely different political circumstances. It seems less about understanding and more about extracting a confession framed as historical curiosity. Indeed, Hessler admits to making himself feel uncomfortable during this. And the question is, why does he force himself to? Two anecdotes from the book perfectly illustrate the strange access that Hessler seems to enjoy. First, he somehow gains incredibly high-profile access to the famous actor and director Jiang Wen, who played the first Emperor Qin Shihuang in the film Emperor's Shadow, and his set of the film Devils on the Doorstep. Jiang Wen is a massive star in China, and still is, and notoriously private and guarded. For a freelance nobody journalist from the New Yorker to get this kind of intimate, lengthy access is unusual to say the least. The resulting profile is deep and personal. No explanation is offered as to how this access was gained. Second, there's a bizarre story where Hessler decides to go camping by himself on a deserted section of the Great Wall. After his terrible night in windy camping conditions at the Great Wall, what else did he expect? Out there, completely alone, he just happens to stumble upon a small local village in the midst of heated political election. He documents the entire event. Of course, the locals are suspicious and eventually accuse him of being a spy and take him to their police station for a further investigation, which from their perspective is a perfectly rational conclusion. A lone American in the mid-2000s nosing around a sensitive political process in a remote area, the sheer improbability of this coincidence strains belief. Feels less like journalism and more like a staged intelligence-gathering scenario. The fact that Hessler offers no explanation other than coincidence that he chose to camp at this site is puzzling. Perhaps the most shocking part of the book, and one that gets glossed over in reviews, is his documentation of what can only be described as aiding and abetting immigration fraud. Hessler has a friend, a Uyghur man, who goes by the name of Polat, just so happens to be a Uyghur dissident, and Polat eventually gets to the United States. Hessler describes in detail how Polat concoct a false story for his asylum application, and also adding a letter supporting his application to make his refugee status seem more credible. He also documents in strange detail how much yuan he converts from dollars via this Polat, who was a black market US dollar and currency exchanger. Hessler presents this as helpful and even a noble act, helping a friend escape oppression. Let's be clear here. This is a journalist, a representative of the New Yorker, openly admitting to committing fraud against his own country's immigration system. He acts as if he is above the law. This is a breathtaking self-report of criminal activity. And this is where Hessler's artistry is so effective. The writing is elegant. The way he connects the longing of the migrant factory worker to the inscriptions on the ancient bones is genuinely clever. For a curious novice with no prior knowledge of China, this book is incredibly seductive. In the sections where he discusses the reformation of Chinese characters, he includes a variety of takes on whether they should have done it translated into pinyin or gone further than they did in Mao's standard simplification of the Chinese characters, and on the factor of Chinese civilization and its existence itself as a uniting force. He also includes those who feel it's exaggerated and those who think that it's largely true throughout Chinese history. He includes criticisms of America. He portrays his characters, particularly his former students, with apparent warmth. The prose is smooth, the narratives are engaging. It's a compelling, human-looking tapestry, but that's the genius of it. The propaganda isn't a blunt instrument, it's a subtle framing. It's a sleight of hand undermining of an order, a purposeful focus on the outliers and the oppressed. He presents a China of fascinating, often sympathetic, but ultimately helpless individuals, forever needing the context and sometimes intervention of the outside world to make their stories complete. After all, there's this quote from the book. One of his former students, Willie Jefferson, self-named, teaches the students a class. And I quote, his words now, "Uncle Wang owns a factory he opened in 1989. The factory makes ladders. One day, I visited Uncle Wang at his factory." Peter Hessler is observing this class, and Willie, the former student and now teacher, reads the passage aloud. Then he jotted some vocabulary on the board and shot Hessler a look. 1989 was an interesting year, he said. Some very interesting things happened in Beijing that year. Now repeat after me. Willie turned to one boy. "What are they doing at the factory?" The boy stood up. "They are seeing the machines." "Very good, you may sit down now." Another student rose. Willie shot him a look again. "Are they making toothbrushes at the factory?" "No, they are not," the boy said. "What are they making?" "They are making ladders." "Very good." For half an hour the class was taught on two levels. The textbook lesson unfolded Mr. Wang, ladders, factories, the joys of the export economy, but periodically Willie included some remark that was strictly for my benefit. He dropped English translations of Sichuanese slang. He alluded to shared memories from Fuling, and when another part of the lesson mentioned 1989, Willie paused once more. I wonder if Uncle Wang's factory was opened in June of 1989, he said, and then moved on. The students had no idea that a private line of English had stretched above their heads, going straight to the foreigner at the back of the classroom. And it ends, the bell rang, the language shifted back to the Wenzhou dialect where they were teaching. The sounds of break time chaos echoed from the hallway. Watching my former student teach that lesson was the best thing that happened to me that September. That smile is Hessler himself content with the job that he has done. Rereading Oracle Bones 20 years on is to witness a perfect time capsule of a specific moment in Western journalism. It represents an era of unparalleled opening access to China, where narrative beauty often triumphed over ethical rigour. A compelling story can obscure and unintentional, perhaps, piece of propaganda. It's a book that tells you as much about the writer and the audience he wrote for as it does about the country it depicts. And it is a book that I can no longer recommend without these very serious caveats. What do you think? Have you read Oracle Bones or River Town? If you read them again, do you think your perspective would change? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into books and Chinese history.